Welcome to the Pooch Parenting Podcast, a podcast for parents with dogs. I'm Michelle Stern, a certified professional dog trainer, mom, and former teacher. Living with kids and dogs at the same time can feel like a circus. I know because I lived it too. Join us as we interview a variety of experts and parents to discuss topics that will make parenting with dogs easier, safer, and less chaotic. Also, you can love living with your dog again. I'll always keep it real, which might even mean that you hear the messiness of life in the background on occasion, but at least you know you're not alone. In today's episode, I talk with animal ethologist Kim Brophy about how families can choose the right dog, along with all of the contributing factors that influence how our dogs behave. We want to help families make good choices and fully understand what makes dogs tick. I hope you enjoy today's episode as much as I did. Hi, Kim. This is so exciting. It's such an exciting time for me to get to interview you. I have been listening to you on every podcast I can find lately. It seems like you're doing a circuit.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of an accidental podcast tour indeed, that I was not anticipating, but it's been loads of fun and very exciting.
Well, it's well-deserved. And you have a book out called Meet Your Dog that I have sitting on my desk that I recommend to everyone. And I would love for you to introduce yourself, of course, but we will also talk about your book. But our main goal of our conversation today is to help families try to get set up as well as possible to bring the right family dog into their home, and how to identify what's possibly going wrong if things don't feel so good for these families. So why don't you introduce yourself to start?
So yes, I'm Kim Brophy, and I'm an applied ethologist and family dog mediator, as well as behavior consultant and certified dog trainer through the IAABC and the CCPDT. So I've been around in this industry for about 20 years, but my background being a little bit different as far as how I got here, with that background in applied ethology. And yeah, I've just been really excited, frustrated for many years, frankly, and now very excited about the kind of evolution in the industry, because I feel like we've been stuck in a paradigm for a long time that is erroneous and has kind of reached its boiling point in terms of its ability to solve the problems that our clients and so many of the families we work with are having. And so it's cool to see the evolution finally occur and the paradigm shift to start to happen.
I totally agree with you. And this conversation is especially wonderful between the two of us because we're both moms. And so we understand what it's like to sort of live in that chaos of parenting kids and dogs at the same time.
Yeah.
And just as we think we have one phase under control, our kids change, nap schedules change, our dogs change. Maybe they're aging and they're crankier than they used to be. And so it's this constant juggle, I guess, of how to cope. Now, I want to start off with an issue that I get a lot, and I know this is one of your pet peeves, which is we get a phone call from somebody and they say, my dog is doing this thing, X, Y, and Z, is biting my kids, is knocking over my toddler, is growling when I walk near its food bowl. What do I do to make it stop? Right? My dog is a bad dog. My dog is doing naughty behaviors. I need it fixed right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both know that there's a variety of circumstances that influence that behavior. And your dog may not actually be being a quote bad dog. So can we talk a little bit about even the language we use when we think about our dogs? Because there's a lot that goes into how they seem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually just writing an article for Drool magazine, which is a new magazine that's come out, y'all, by the way. They only have like 3 editions so far, but oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, and I'm very excited for its future. It's related to Bixby pet products. But anyway, so I was writing an article for them about this kind of question and problem. And one of the things as you were talking that just jumped out at me that I was really circulating a lot of my conversation about in the article, and was also a heart of the TED Talk that I did, the problem with treating a dog like a pet, is this erroneous concept that dogs are, by definition, quintessentially pets, that that's what they're here for, which is what sets us up for all of these disappointments and frustrations and unmet expectations because it's not the public's fault, y'all. Like, if you are a struggling, frustrated family, it is not your fault. This has been very effective messaging in the pet industry and from breeders, because the pet market has just grown so rapidly, and it's become such a monster. I mean, it's an industry that has proved itself completely resistant to any kind of economic ups and downs. Like, we will spend money on our dogs when we don't spend money on ourselves and our probably our own kids, if we're being honest sometimes. But anyway, the truth is that it's not that people therefore don't love their dogs, right? It's not that they're not willing to go above and beyond. It's that we've literally been divorced from the kind of natural history of dogs, the hundreds and thousands of years that came before the last, say, 50, and particularly the last like 15. 20. And so in our reality right now, in, like, say, developed nations like the United States, we're told essentially that it's all how you raise them, that you can pick whatever color, size, style you like, and then if you just do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, everything will be fine. Therefore, it kind of implies that everything else outside of what we want as our pet and in their behavior is naughty. It's somehow pathological or intentionally bad. And even the whole concept, like you pointed out, the terms that matter so much of obedience training and commands, stuff like that, even behavior modification. Like, it's not that there's bad intentions behind those terms, but it kind of continues to put us in this godly seat of the puppet master, this puppeteer, where we in theory have these little blank slate puppies that come into our house, these tabula rosas, that then we can foster to be whatever we want them to be, turn them on when we want them on, turn them off when we want them off, and just basically have them kind of passive love sponges in and around our lives and families that don't have much of opinions or needs or frustrations of their own. And the reality just couldn't be further from the truth.
Oh, okay. I want to stop here for a second and dig into a couple of those things a little bit further. So I hear from a ton of families that they want to start with a puppy because they want to be the one who shapes who that puppy becomes. And there is some truth to that, because we can build trust and we can set our puppies up with good experiences, but that's not always enough. I used to work for a shelter. I was a volunteer there for my whole childhood, essentially. And then I worked there as an adult. And at one point, I remember knowing a couple of people who had adopted puppies from the same litter, because at that point there weren't very many puppies available. And so they all adopted from this particular litter. And every single one of those puppies, except for one, was returned because it was an aggressive dog. I mean, it like neurologically, there was something wrong with these dogs. And so, and I had a client one time, and they had a golden retriever, because golden retrievers are, quote, the best family dog or whatever. And that's why they got one. And it started biting the family members, not because they were doing anything wrong. And so sometimes things go wrong. So I like what you said. They're not, as my mentor said, she said, puppies are not clay. They're not made out of clay. You can't just necessarily take them and make them into whatever you want them to be. So let's talk a little bit. I feel like this is a good segue into your legs model, where I want to dive in a little bit into the components that do make dogs the way that they are. Because here's the thing. Parents have enough guilt as it is. Okay. So, and you know this, we're guilted about everything. We're guilted about being a stay-at-home mom because we're not taking care of ourselves enough. We're guilted about being a working mother because we're not home with our kids. Like, people will guilt you about opposites all day and night. And people are very judgy. And so what I love about your legs model is that you are essentially saying to people, look, there are a lot of contributing factors, and here's what you can do better. And here's where you have no control. And it's not all your fault. right?
Right.
Let's take away some of that guilt.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of the reasons I love the legs model is that it does that for us and for the dogs and for the professionals, right? So, like, as the family member, it just kind of puts things in perspective. Like, oh my gosh, that makes things make so much sense. I didn't do this. I didn't fail somehow. And for the dog, now they're not taking this kind of, accusation perspective that we have of them, like, bad dog, why are you doing these things? And then as trainers, we also have all of this guilt when we can't quote fix everything because that's kind of the model that we've all been kind of running around in. And so I love that you said that because I do think Lord knows, we beat ourselves and each other up enough about all sorts of things. We don't need to add like dog behavior to that list. Um, and just as a note, and I'd love to come back to this, I mean, the just watching the number of behavioral euthanasias that occur and the stories behind that, where I say I wish I'd met this person before they brought that puppy home
Me too.
and early on, because so much of what often goes wrong is at least potentially foreseeable just because of the combination of elements with the mismatched legs, as we talked about.
I listened to a podcast that you just did with Michael Shikashio that was wonderful. And you were talking about, I think it was a Malamute living in Florida in an
Mhm,
apartment, right? So
mhm,
by meeting somebody like you, or I'm going to be learning from you because I'm going to be taking your big course,
mhm.
um, that which I'm so excited about, by the way. Um, if people work with a professional who understands dogs and what influences dogs behavior before they choose a dog, I think that we can set them up to at least have the odds more in their favor. We can't predict everything and things can still go wrong, but
Yeah.
we could at least say, okay, the lifestyle of you and your family and how active you are, or how sedentary you are, that's no judgment, it's just the
Mhm.
reality. Are you a game night person or are you a backpacking person? That
Right.
will then impact the dog that you choose and how well or it will fit or not fit into your lifestyle. And so
Mhm.
I absolutely hear what you're saying of, God, I wish they met me first, because now what happens is now they have this dog who may or may not be working out. And
Mhm.
it's hard, right? You can't just get a redo.
Right, and now instead of feeling like, I'm just kind of one voice drowning in the sea of, the kind of collective, popular thinking about this, even within our industry, what's exciting to me about things like the course is that we can have more of us really understanding these things and being able to communicate it with our clients, because I think even trainers have felt like they're supposed to say it's all how you raise them, and they're supposed to say same things regardless of all the other components. So yeah, let me jump into legs because I'm sure our listeners are like, okay, well, tell us what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yes.
A way to think about this is, and the legs logo is kind of like this, is to think of it literally like four legs. So imagine underneath the body of a dog, you've got four legs, as they should have. Learning is the first leg, environment is the second leg. So L, E, and then G and S. So genetics and self. So the learning part is exactly what you think it is, except it's not just training. People tend to think of it like it's just training, but they're literally learning 24/7, frustrating as that might be. The environment piece is obvious as well, but it's, everything in your dog's external world. So it's not just literally like your home environment, it's your neighborhood, it's the room they stay in when you're gone, it's your work schedule, it's their relationships, like everything that's external conditions. The genetics piece is pretty obvious too. That's whatever those selective forces are for that particular dog. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about the real vast differences behaviorally, not just physically, between the different kinds of dogs. And then the self is the internal conditions. And so that's things like age, sex, health, disability, disease, injury, infection, nutrition, supplements, medications, and all of those things that are the internal conditions for the dog, that are that kind of like abstract, the umbel to the animal, the experience they're having, just who they are, their quirks, likes, dislikes, preferences, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Okay. So all of those things come together to influence who a dog is. So we're going to pick on the border collie because they're so easy to pick on.
They
Now,
are
it's
easy
not
to pick
because I
on.
don't like them. because
Yeah,
I like them.
no, I
They're
love them, but they're
they're
just really easy
smart,
to pick on.
they're biddable, they want to work hard, and they do work hard. But because of you, I now think of border collies often as a captive cheetah in a china shop. And I've said this in other podcast episodes before. You take an animal that was bred to work all day long
Mm,
in big, vast open spaces to
mhm.
control the movements of other creatures. And then we put them inside the confines of four walls. And we have children who are like sheep and they don't want to be herded around the house and bit and nipped and all of those things that border collies are trying to control everything in their environment. So it's very natural for a border collie to move a lot, to think a lot, and to give itself a job if you don't give it one. And
Mhm.
that might mean hurting your children or whatever, which we find problematic. And that's not something we're going to train out of the dog because this is
Mhm.
who the dog is.
Mhm.
So let's talk about legs in terms of how do we help families kind of understand this dog that may be demonstrating challenging behaviors that we want, quote, fixed. We can't train everything. We can't fix
Mhm.
everything by training. And I think we're doing a disservice by asking trainers, frankly, and the dog to be trained out of it. Like, what do I need to teach him so he stops doing X, Y, and Z? I don't think that's fair.
Right. Well, and what happens is when we go about this and we're kind of like erroneously putting our energy in the wrong place where it's not going to have much effect anyway, is we're acting like we have all of this power to influence something through training, and we actually just really frustrate and confuse everyone involved by creating all of these weird little behavior sequences, fancy things we can put in place that still don't prevent the behavior from popping out. And so, like, one way to think about this, so going back to that like legs image of the dog with the four legs, in that particular dog, so say take a border collie living in a small house with a bunch of children and no fenced yard, and maybe owners that work 8-hour days, so the dog's crated all day, and in the morning when you're getting ready for school, all of us moms know that nightmare. It's like the sheep are just crazy in the morning, like, and they're screaming and then they're hitting each other with their toothbrushes and all that stuff. And so the border collie is like, y'all have to realize sudden environmental contrast. It's a fancy word in our industry for basically like everything was status quo and then this happened. Basically, children are walking sudden environmental contrast. Like everything that they do when they're like awake and moving, especially when they're young, is a sudden environmental contrast.
Yes.
And so that's a releasing stimuli in the kind of world of ethology, which means it's an event or something that occurs in the environment that releases a particular behavioral response to that. And so in nature, all of that's like adaptive, helps you survive. In the case of dogs that were bred by humans, we bred these responses into them for certain conditions that were really useful when sheep 432 decided that he was going to walk away from the group or what have you, or there's some kind of straggler, or they're all going to suddenly move to the left because of whatever, and you've got to reconcile that problem quickly. So if you think about that image for this dog, you could have a perfectly solid L learning leg. You did everything right for that dog. And the S piece at the end could be perfectly solid, really healthy, great nutrition, wonderful medical care, all of that. And in the middle, you've got the E and the G, which are basically these like broken, disheveled, like,
We have a
you know,
two-legged dog.
you're like, oh, those legs don't look very good. They need a little help. So we have to figure out how to like do surgery on those things or somehow put in an orthopedic something to help support it, or maybe put some blocks underneath it. I mean, and obviously this is a crude analogy, but like, where I'm going with
Yeah.
this. We have to realize it matters that much. So if we're putting our energy at the L and the S, we're going to drug the dog, or with the S with the internal conditions, or we're just going to do more training at the dog. But really the problem's happening between the environment and the genetics, which are meant above all else to work in sync together because of the whole concept of this fancy thing called an evolutionary niche, right? So if that key doesn't fit the lock between the genetics and the environment, then you get friction. And so that's what's happening in that situation. And so your best bet, since you can only do so much, not much with the genetics, right? Once you have the dog in front of you, is you want to think about the environment and you want to think about how can I manage this particular dog during the time when these releasing stimuli of my small children are running through the family room in the morning screaming. He
Yes.
can't almost not respond to that condition. What we could do is we could manage the dog away from that stimulus completely at that time in the morning. Maybe we could hire a dog walker for that period of time in the morning to get the dog out of the house. Maybe we could have a daycare that picks the dog up before all of that chaos ensues or something. Maybe it's a matter of simply putting the dog in the backyard for 45 minutes while we're getting dressed. Whatever you do to manage against the rehearsal of those neural pathways just running fluidly over and over again every morning while we're pulling our hair out, and the dog's not even picking this behavior. This is instinctual. If we think about that and then we provide the dog other outlets, so send him to daycare and let him be the fun police all day, and then he's going to come home tired. If your dog's well socialized because you did a great job with that that learning leg, and then then you have a really wonderful daycare that you can send him to where he can literally chase the terriers around all day or whatever else, then he's going to come home satisfied and then tired, and then you can put him in away again for the crazy post bath period that we all know so well before they go to bed
Oh,
and they're burning off all that
bedtime.
steam.
Oh, yeah, bedtime is bad.
Yeah.
But the dog will be mentally satisfied and fulfilled by that time of the day because it's had other fun things going on. So that will shift some of that. I love that you talked about that because management is such a hugely important piece of behavior change. You can change the behavior that you don't like sometimes by changing the environment, right? That's the E leg, is that if we've got that shriveled E leg, then we need to change our environment. And that's where distance and baby gates and pens and other options work out so well. It's not the
And
only solution.
and just to put it out there honestly to everyone, I think we also have to swallow the pill that's pretty uncomfortable to swallow, that you could do all of that I just described and you could still have a problem, because a certain border collie is going to have such strong genetic impulses to respond to literally anything that's going on, like in your household. Like the kid could start crying at an otherwise normal time, and that will be a releasing stimuli for the dog to feel like he should, quote, do something to help resolve that sudden environmental contrast. And so it's important to realize that not all dogs can even be successful in any environment if we just do the right things. That's part of the bigger picture, the long game that we're having to talk about as a culture and as an industry, is that there are frankly some dogs that are going to be so frustrated and so stressed and helpless against their own instincts that we selected into them, that it's going to remain dysfunctional for everybody. And that's something that we need to acknowledge as well.
I like that you said that, because there are families that need to acknowledge that this dog is not working for them. And it's not their fault. It's not the dog's fault and it's not their fault, but sometimes there's just such a huge mismatch that for everyone's sanity and quality of life, that it's, sometimes you need to think about rehoming that dog and putting it in an environment where it can be more successful or be happier, and that you're actually not failing the dog, you're actually serving the dog at that point. And it's not a badge of failure to rehome a dog. And I think that you really have to think of things sometimes from the dog's perspective. How could this dog live a happier life? Because no dog that's stuck in a box or a kennel all the time, because that's the only way you can keep people safe or sane, that's a really terrible quality of life for a dog. And that's not fair.
No, absolutely. And I think too, this is one of those things where it helps to think about relationships, right? It helps to think about our kids. It helps to think about personal friendships or relationships we might be in life. Sometimes we serve the boyfriend that we break up with the best just because we're saying, you know what? Like, I don't think we're going to be able to be happy together and silly. I think that I hear you say you really just want to travel the world. And you know what? I hate traveling and I love you, but I want you to be able to do what you need to do. And obviously, with our kids, now that's different. And I think this is where people get really stuck about the kind of moral impetus we feel to persevere no matter what. And what I would say is if you happen to feel like, hey, look, I got this dog, they're like my child, I've adopted them for life, then you need to be prepared to the same level that you would for your children to move for them, to change your entire lifestyle for them, because sometimes that's actually what it's going to take. And that's also a huge pill to swallow. Like, would most of us move for our dog? Would we move to an entirely different kind of home environment? Most of us would for our kids. But that's also not always a practical option. Sometimes that's not a possibility due to finances, geography, family, work, other obligations, etc. But it doesn't serve us when we just kind of oversimplify it because it's daunting and we just keep saying, oh, yeah, well, you just throw more training at the dog, it'll solve everything.
Oh boy. I think you're right. I mean, there are times when the dog is literally in the wrong climate,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that there's a lot of responsibility that belongs on the shoulders of many people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that many people need to do a better job at serving the dog and serving the client better, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't really think it's responsible. And I'm not trying to pick on anyone, so I don't want to like get hate mail after this, but I don't really think it's very responsible, like you talked about the Malamute, for a Malamute breeder to send a dog to Florida where it's hot and humid and the dog may not be able to regulate its temperature. I mean,
I had a client who had two huskies. She lived here in Asheville and she moved to Florida. And within 6 months, the dog's skin was rotting.
I heard you talk about that. It made
And
me
it's just
so sad.
that's just physical health, like never mind the behavioral health, but like, so if it's that hot, and then, so basically then the animal pursues opportunities for water and then you try to provide them opportunities for water to cool off, but then the water gets trapped beneath the undercoat and then the dog's skin starts rotting. But that now what's the better alternative for that dog? So like, where do they get the exercise then if it's too hot for them to actually exercise? Where are they going to meet those behavioral needs? And so what happens is you have this compounding set of variables like that create more and more problems and frustrations. It actually kind of reminds me of how some of the medications that we have available today give you as many side effects as they do solve your problems. So it's like the more medications you're on, the more medications you're on to solve the symptoms from all the medications that you're on.
Yeah.
There was one point a few years ago, my mom came off of like 14 medications at the same time, that as she had aged with her medical problems, just continued to kind of deteriorate her overall health. And now she's off of all of them but one because she got to a doctor who knew what they were doing. So I think we end up in this kind of whack-a-mole thing with our dogs too, right? Where we're like, well, I'll solve this problem by doing this. And us trainers can be really guilty about creating those same kinds of things. Like, oh, well, you can plug this up by doing this little training exercise. But if we're not really getting to the heart of the problem, something else is going to show up. There's going to be another symptom, or we can actually cause more problems with those interventions thinking we're solving one thing, but then we get three new problems as a result.
So we need more transparency and we need
Mm-hmm.
more honesty. And
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, I mean, I see it everywhere. I see it from the shelter world, who is really trying to get the right numbers and they're hoping to get good
Mm-hmm.
matches so dogs don't get returned, but it doesn't always work out because people aren't always transparent on both ends, right? The adopter really wants
Yeah.
that cute dog and they may say one thing just to get it. Then, oh gosh. And trainers, I think we need to be more honest. I think we need to be more honest when we
Yeah.
don't think we can help, or
Yeah. And we're
when
told not to.
yeah, I think, or even to say, I wouldn't get that breed if I were you. I think that's a
Right.
mistake. I think you should do something different instead.
Yeah. And we've been called breedist for that. And it's interesting because right now we have this really weird confluence of phenomenon going on in some different subsects of the pet industry. Like in the sheltering world, one of the new fads is to not put anything about breeds in the dog's file or on the kennel card because they get adopted faster because then nobody's like thinking about that as like something for that they should consider. So if they just connect with the dog, they'll take them. But that would kind of be like, if you had no idea what you're getting when you went to bought a car and then you take it home and you're like, I don't know how to drive a stick shift. And it's like, well, too bad. Good luck with that. Or I don't have my CDL to drive an 18 wheeler, I mean, whatever that might be. Like there are differences that are really going to matter. They're or at least are very likely going to matter. They're going to show up. And the very least we need to do is prepare ourselves and change our expectations accordingly in the light of the fact that those things might show up. So again, the genetics piece is just one of the four legs. But because if you think about that in a way, it has this pervasive way of showing up despite everything else, because by definition, it has generations of reinforcement history behind it. And that's not necessarily the case for the learning that they're doing in their new life, their particular experience through their own health and internal experiences, and then their external conditions. Like all of that is new, if you will, to that particular animal, but those genes are not new. And so all of that information that, was kind of absorbed and then passed on through prior generations because that was what was selected for, it has staying power, and you can't preserve the shape without also preserving the function. That doesn't mean every single border collie actually will respond to sudden environmental contrast or herd. It just means that in the kind of like basic scope of border collies, you're going to get a lot more herding responses than you are not herding responses on the whole, in a gradient, of course. But I really, I think what you're saying about the kind of responsibility that's spread across shoulders is really true, because I think it's really tempting for everyone to blame someone and say, well, if so-and-so just did this, or if so-and-so would just stop doing that or whatever. It's tempting. We like pointing fingers, but the truth is it's really complicated. And there's been a number of folks in the industry who've also brought up the aspect of our modern gene pool of dogs, right? Like
Yes.
we're not helping with that right now,
No.
guys. Like the whole thing about dog breeding needs a complete and total upheaval, because we're still stuck in dog fancy, completely divorced from the reality of what that actually means when we bring it home. And breeders, because it's unregulated, can make anything they want that basically, as long as there's a demand for it, they have some
And they
interest in
are.
creating a
They
supply,
are.
and they're
They're
high demand.
designer breeds left and right these days because
Oh
they're
yeah.
selling a story that may or may not be true. So where I live in the Bay Area in
Mhm.
California, and you can't throw a stick without hitting a labradoodle or golden doodle or
Mhm.
anything oodle.
Mhm.
And I'm not judging those dogs, it's not their choice that they exist. And
Mhm.
I can understand the compelling marketing reasons why you might want a non-shedding dog of a certain size, because
Mhm.
all of those things are designable.
Mhm.
But a lot of them have significant behavior problems.
Mhm.
And part of that is because breeders are mass producing these dogs to meet the demand of non-shedding dogs of a certain size.
Mhm.
But it's also, they may not be attending to the behavioral traits that each parent has, right? They
Mhm.
may not be breeding the ideal pet dog to another ideal pet dog, therefore creating baby
Right.
dogs that are suited to live in your house, right? You
Right.
end up with these overexcited, off the
Mhm.
walls,
Too
very
smart.
overreactive, dogs that people are like, what just happened? I got
Mhm.
this dog because I thought I was doing X, Y, and Z, and I ended up with this very
Mhm.
challenging pet that I was
Yeah.
not anticipating.
Yeah, and that whole, you have to realize, guys, breeders are selling a product. Now, does that mean that everyone who creates a product is doing it unethically? Not remotely. That's not what I'm saying at all. I have incredible respect for many breeders, particularly if they're going to breed a working dog, if they're going to place them in functioning working homes. But like people that are breeding for pet homes and breeding working dogs for pet homes, or just breeding any two things together because they can make money off of it for the pet homes, themselves really not having much education about the breeds they're putting together. It's all about if someone will buy it, someone will make and sell it. That's where
Right.
we're at. And the demand is so high right now that
Yeah.
if it's cute, it's off the shelf, so to speak.
Well, and I want to just say, because I don't want people's hackles getting up at it, because we're not bashing breeders. We're bashing people creating inappropriate dogs, or dogs that don't have the right breeding without the right intentions. There are amazing breeders out there who
Oh,
are
yeah.
looking at temperament and health and structure, right? I mean, there's a movement to try to get, let's say, Boston Terriers, for example, to actually be able to breathe. So I don't want to say that you and I are having this discussion to pick on breeders in particular, because I think that anywhere you can get a dog, there can be problems from it. And I want to go back to the shelter thing that you were talking about not having breed information on the shelter card, which to me is just insane. Because oftentimes when I worked at the shelter, I mean, you see more bully breed mixes than anything else most of the time, or Chihuahuas. And oftentimes people who are writing the descriptions, they try to make it sound less threatening, less stereotypical than it might otherwise seem to be. But then I had this fantasy picture pop into my head, right? Which is that all throughout the adoption kennels are the pages from your book that talk about breed characteristics, right? So instead of hiding that information, what I think they should be doing is they should be putting it front and center, right? Let's say.
Do you want to hear a really crazy story?
Yeah.
This will be the first time anyone's heard this story too, at
Okay.
least on podcasts. So just as an example of where we've been as an industry compared to thankfully where we are now, a few years ago at our local shelter, I was on the board of the Asheville Humane Society at the time. And actually, we had kind of started this project maybe 5-7 years ago, and it had kind of evolved and morphed, and tons of people had been working together to do exactly what you just described. A new trainer, new to the industry, came into town and took the behavior manager position because the gal that we'd been working with for years left to go work for the ASPCA. And this new trainer had bought hook, line, and sinker the narrative that it's all how you raise them, and everything else was literally breed racism.
Oh.
And she came in and brought along all that propaganda that's out there saying genes don't matter at all, blah, blah, blah. And there was so much discord within the organization created by this one person who didn't want to look at the full scope of the sciences, that the whole project was tabled, and we never went forward with it because it was too politically precarious at the time. But now the funny thing is that like we're getting to a point where I foresee shelters actually giving themselves permission to embrace it. Now, I do recognize there's short-term problems with that, because what do we do with all these dogs that people are like, well, that does not sound good? That's an issue, guys, but we're not going to solve the long-term problem by avoiding the short-term one. I mean, I recognize that's an issue. But again, people need to know. They need to know what they're getting into. If they can, still, we don't want to discourage people from certain dogs, but it's just a matter of like, hey, so you might just want to be prepared for the possibility of, and if you do A, B, C, D, E, F, G in this particular case with this dog, it'll just help optimize your success.
Yes. So that's what I was imagining, right? Because you have sections in your book where you talk about different groupings of dogs and certain behavioral characteristics that are common. None of them are absolutely predictive, because there are always individuals within every breed that sort of defy, just like with people, right? There's a variety. But just sort of embracing it. Like, this dog is a mix of terrier and poodle. And here are the behavioral characteristics that often come with terriers and poodles. Do you love your garden? You might not want to get a terrier because they love to dig, but they're smart and they're funny and they're, all of the good things too, right? Yeah. So at least, like, buyer beware, like, you should know what you would be getting into, but not just hear the bad things, but people do need to know what those are.
Yeah, it's kind of
because
like getting an operating manual for anything that you get for your home too. It's like, if you get a certain type of vehicle, you need to know how it works and how all the little things work so can do things correctly. Things like just remembering to unplug your hair dryer before you leave the house, or like, I mean, really basic stuff. Like, it shouldn't be so personalized, but I think it really evolved in this way that was so well intentioned to get people away from the bad, useless part of breed stereotyping and breed specific legislation, where it's like, oh, certain dogs are just vicious and evil. Which, by the way, guys, there are no dogs out there that are just fundamentally vicious and
thank you.
evil. I'm just
Thank you for
putting that
saying
out
that.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And but so it's a matter of when and where different behaviors show up and why, and the things that you can do to see things coming and then prevent and steer things in other directions and manage and all of that. But there are no breeds of dogs that are just fundamentally jerks. So
No.
just
No, well,
everyone
and
needs to
knowing your
understand that.
lifestyle. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like there should be a quiz, who
Yeah.
are you? Like you go into a shelter before you even get in the door, there's like a
We had that
keypad
too. We
that
had that too. We had a little computer thing and a
oh my
setup, and they would go
God.
through and take the quiz, and then it would steer them to like their top 3 group choices, and then they'd walk through, and the dogs were marked in their kennels about which
Oh,
ones had. Oh yeah, we had the whole
we
thing
need
ready to
that.
go.
People who say, I want a sport dog prospect. That's going to
Mhm.
be an entirely different type of dog than, a grandma who wants a lap dog is going to want, right?
Mhm.
So you just need to be super honest about what your lifestyle is, what you're looking for. Do you want somebody snuggly, or do you want someone who wants to go, go, go all day long?
Mhm.
And your book, Meet Your Dog, which I will link to in our show notes, is a remarkable tool because first of all, it's written in a really approachable, easy to understand way, which I really respect. I have a history of being a teacher for 16 years, so I really appreciate good teaching. Um, but beyond that, you categorize dogs into groups so that you can have some trends that, while not guaranteed, are common based on genetic history, right? What were these dogs bred to do? And these are issues that you may see if you have this kind of dog. And
Mhm.
gosh, it is so helpful. I was reading it to my husband. I was like, listen to this. And so I was reading him, because we have a border terrier, and I was reading him the terrier thing. And I said, luckily, he's not a huge digger, but he does do boom, 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 boom. And I read him the
Right.
whole list of other stuff, and it's nice because, to me, it doesn't mean that I did something to make him that way. It's that
Right.
history did something to make him that way. And I can set up our life such that he can have outlets for the things that make him tick and that make
Mhm.
him happy and feel like he's having the best day ever, because I understand who he truly is, right?
Yeah, and it's just what you just described. All of that made me think about these conversations that we've been having on the Beyond the Operant series that we have out on YouTube with Andrew Hale and Kathy Murphy. They're both professionals in the UK. Kathy Murphy is a neuroscientist, and Andrew Hale is a human psychologist turned dog behavior consultant. And Andrew Hale talks a lot about his kind of coined concept for the industry of relief. And one of the things that I think about when I think about all these struggling families and all these struggling dogs and all of these quote behavior problems that are really just symptoms of all this dysfunction and imbalance between the legs is frustration. So much frustration that can even reach a point of exasperation and complete maladaptive dysfunction where everyone is just barely surviving their home life. Like, wow, right? But we have a lot of those clients. So then the question, as opposed to being, how do you train the dog to not do that or whatever, is where can we create relief for everybody? Like, that's our job. That's why I like the model of family dog mediation instead of dog training. It changes the expectations of the client and of ourselves. So instead of coming in like, you come in, you manipulate behavior of said organism, hairy four-legged thing over there, and then I will pay you after you've done your job. No, that should not be the working model. It's not realistic or fair for anyone, frankly. It's just setting everyone up for failure. Instead, if we say, I'm a mediator, I'm a family dog mediator, my job is to help both of you find that middle ground where both of your needs, your frustrations, your questions, your concerns, your desires, etc., are acknowledged And my job is to bring those things together where all of those things get to matter. And we creatively will solve these problems together if they're solvable at all. And I think that that is really an important concept. I'm so grateful to Andrew for just kind of hammering that again and again. Is it's about relief in the moment. What is that? And then overall relief for the family, right?
You're going to make me cry. I honestly, I have a membership for parents with dogs, and you just validated for me what I'm doing, because that's what it is. That's actually what it is.
Mhm.
It's coaching, it's parent coaching with management tips and games and activities and relationship builders, and yeah, a little bit of training, but just to help your dog maybe be away from the triggers so that we all like each other and we can all live together again. And I have gone through phases where I doubt what I'm doing because it's totally outside the box. And I think it's outside the box because it's new. And it's outside the box because it's, I'm family dog mediating without knowing that that's what I'm doing. But
Which is why you're taking the course, and then you will, like,
I'm, you know, course, and I'll put a stamp on it.
Yeah, family dog mediator, you know, because I think this is part of what we're doing as professionals. And I hope that the public, your listeners, your families hear this so they can start realizing they can ask something different of the professionals in their town. They could say to them, how do you approach it? Are you a family dog mediator? You know, do you understand comprehensively all these moving parts or not? Which will then put pressure on professionals to fill in those blanks and connect the dots to meet your needs as families better. But all of us need a complete upheaval and upgrade in what we're doing, because it's really not fair, is it? Right? Like, you as a family, you feel disappointed and frustrated and exasperated. The dog's feeling that way. Your neighbors are probably feeling that way, or the people who come over to your house, or the ones that run from you when you're walking down the street with the dog lunging and barking at them. Like, it's really, it's funny. I know there are some trainers out there who indeed have an ego the size of Texas and are like, I can manipulate anything. But I think most trainers hear this and they're like, oh, thank God. I keep feeling like the expectations are on me to control all these things that are completely out of my control, and that I'm failing if I think outside that box, because that's the model of dog obedience training, which we've all been conditioned to think is the answer for everything.
Oh, I think we should stop here, because I could talk to you for a million hours, and I have a feeling I will when I take your course, because it's going to be intense and I'll have a lot of questions. Thank you so much for adding me to your podcast tour, your accidental podcast tour. I'm really, really happy to bring this topic to the forefront and help families realize that there are a ton of moving pieces, and that there are people like us out there who understand from the parenting side, from the dog behavior side, from the genetic side, etc., that there's not one simple solution, and that we have to look at the whole picture, and we can manipulate many moving pieces to see if we can provide relief for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Where can people find you, Kim?
So I'm not sure when this episode is coming out, but after this week, we're at the tail end of April here, our new website will be up. So right now, if you go to the dogdoorbehaviorcenter.com, or sorry, not the dogdoorbehaviorcenter.com, but dogdoorbehaviorcenter.com, you might see our old site, but hopefully by the time listeners hear this, they will be seeing our amazing new website. And so they can go there. Also, before or after or at the same time, follow me on Facebook and connect with me there. I love having conversations with people in private messaging, really just engaging with people on an individual level. And if nothing else, just, you know, connecting and validating each other and lifting each other up as we all go through these changes together. Also, please enjoy the book, share the book, give it to people that you know who love their dogs, frustrated or not. It is, as you say, really accessible reading. That was my aim in writing it. And I'm really glad that you feel that way about it, because I want it to be something useful for everyone. So yeah, those are all a few places you can connect, and I'd love to connect with anyone.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kim. And I have a feeling I'll be talking to you again.
Yeah, you take care.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. please subscribe to the Pooch Parenting Podcast on iTunes or on the podcast app of your choice. If you're looking for ongoing support for your family with dogs, be sure to get on the waiting list for my Thriving Parents with Kids and Dogs membership at www.safekidsanddogs.com. And don't forget to follow Pooch Parenting on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks for listening.